Imagine this for a second. You get arrested in a drug bust. You go to trial, and you actually manage to prove that the police completely mishandled the drug evidence. So you beat the drug charge. You're acquitted. But then, the judge strikes the gavel and sentences you to nearly a decade in prison anyway, all from that exact same arrest. Honestly, it sounds impossible, right? Well, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack a truly mind-bending legal outcome from the Philippine Supreme Court. We're looking at the fascinating case of Jeremy Reyes.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's like a giant puzzle. If an arrest is initiated because of a drug transaction, and that entire drug case falls apart in court because of police errors, what happens to the other evidence they found in your pockets during that same arrest? More specifically, what happens if they find a gun? Can you literally be acquitted of the very crime that caused your arrest, but still go to prison for the weapon? Well, the answer lies in the really fascinating, intricate mechanics of criminal law.
Section 1. The Incident, March 25, 2017.
To really understand how this happens, we need to go back to the very beginning in Santa Maria, Bulacan. And, as with a lot of criminal cases, there are two radically different accounts of what actually went down that day. On one side, we've got the prosecution's narrative. Police Officer 1, Genesis Tolentino, testified that, acting on a tip, they conducted a completely legitimate sting operation. They went to Jeremy Reyes' house, bought exactly 100 pesos worth of marijuana, and arrested him. But on the flip side, Jeremy Reyes paints a terrifying picture of a frame-up. He claimed he was just inviting a friend to a Bible study when 5 armed men suddenly burst in, forced them to the ground, planted the marijuana, and literally forced him to pick up a pen gun so that, in his own words, he could be killed.
Now, the courts ultimately had to evaluate the evidence based on the prosecution's timeline. So let's walk through that. The police initiate the buy bust. The confidential asset and PO1 Tolentino go inside. A 100 peso marijuana transaction takes place. Then the arrest signal is given and Reyes is frisked. During this frisking, the police recover the buy bust money. And, crucially, an improvised gun loaded with a live .45 caliber bullet. Right there at the scene, PO1 Tolentino marks the gun as GBT-7 and the ammunition as GBT-6. Section 2. A tale of two charges. Because of all the different items recovered during the single, super chaotic event, the legal aftermath basically split into two distinct tracks. Reyes wasn't just facing one problem here. He was facing two severe violations of Philippine law. First, the illegal sale of dangerous drugs. That's under Republic Act No. 9165. And second, the illegal possession of firearms and ammunition under Republic Act No. 10591. So two separate laws, two entirely separate charges stemming from the exact same moment in time.
And this brings us to the massive plot twist at the regional trial court. The judge delivers a split verdict. Jeremy Reyes is completely acquitted of the drug charges. The court ruled the prosecution just failed to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt on the drugs. But, and this is the really big but here, he is found guilty of the firearm charge. Now, to understand how the court justified this contradictory outcome, we have to look at exactly why the drug charge failed in the first place.
Section 3. The chain of custody.
So the crucial point is that the acquittal on the drug charges wasn't because the court actually believed Reyes' story about a Bible study frame-up. It was strictly procedural. Section 21 of the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act requires a strict, documented, and unbroken chain of custody for seized drugs. And why is that? Well, because drugs are incredibly easy to fake, right? They're easy to plant. The law demands this tedious, step-by-step process to absolutely guarantee that the powder or leaves presented in the courtroom are the exact same substances seized from the suspect at the scene.
In Reyes' case, the police made a really critical error. The prosecution completely failed to prove the fourth link in this chain of custody for the marijuana. And because of this one break in documentation, the integrity of the drug evidence was totally compromised. By law, the court literally had no choice but to acquit him of the drug charges. But, of course, this naturally raises a massive question. If the police bungled the drug evidence, and the drugs were the entire reason for the arrest and the search in the first place, shouldn't that flaw poison the gun evidence too? Like, shouldn't the whole shebang just be thrown out? Jeremy Reyes appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, arguing exactly this point.
Section 4. Amorphous versus unique evidence. Now, what's really interesting about this side is the Supreme Court's brilliant legal logic, which basically comes down to the physical nature of the evidence itself. Think about illegal drugs for a second. They're amorphous, fungible. A gram of marijuana looks like literally any other gram of marijuana. It's highly susceptible to being planted or altered, which is exactly why it needs that incredibly strict chain of custody. But a firearm? A gun is a uniquely structured object. It's solid metal, it has a specific form, it's highly resistant to change. Because of this solid reality, it doesn't require those strict Section 21 rules, it just requires standard testimony from a witness who handled it.
The Supreme Court laid it out perfectly in their decision. They wrote, narcotic substances are relatively easy to source. Such is the reason why narcotic substances should undergo the tedious process of being authenticated. The chain of custody rule does not apply to objects made unique. And, a gun is undeniably an object made unique.
Furthermore, the Supreme Court clarified a really vital distinction about the arrest itself. The failure of the police was in the handling of the drug evidence after the fact. It was not a failure of the operation itself. Both the lower courts and the Supreme Court agreed that the initial buy-bust operation was completely legitimate. Therefore, the search of Reyes was perfectly legal because it was contemporaneous to a valid warrantless arrest. Since the source of the search wasn't irregular at all, the firearm discovered during that legal search remains completely admissible in court.
Section 5. The Supreme Court Verdict.
So, with the legality of the search upheld and the gun evidence deemed fully admissible without needing that strict drug-style chain of custody, the prosecution only needed to prove two basic elements to secure a conviction for the gun. First, the existence of the firearm. PO1 Tolentino successfully identified the GBT-7 improvised gun and the live ammo right there in court. Second, the lack of a license. The prosecution presented a clear certification from the Firearms and Explosives Office, proving Jeremy Reyes was absolutely not a licensed firearm holder of any kind.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the law actually works in compartments. The Supreme Court fully affirmed the conviction. They declared that possessing an improvised gun with a live .45 caliber ammunition without a license is an entirely separate crime from the illegal sale of drugs. You can totally fail to prove one, but still successfully prove the other.
Now, because the gun was loaded with a live round, the penalty was actually increased 1 degree higher. The Supreme Court handed down the final, modified, maximum sentence, 10 years, 8 months, and 1 day in prison. That is an incredibly heavy real-world consequence, stemming entirely from an object found during an arrest for a drug charge that was ultimately completely dismissed. Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. We see how the law treats the powdery, amorphous nature of drugs completely differently from the solid, unique structure of a gun. It demands absolute perfection from the police for one, but relies on basic, credible testimony for the other. So by compartmentalizing these crimes and treating the physical evidence so differently, does this legal precedent perfectly balance the need for strict police procedure with the ultimate pursuit of justice? It's a truly fascinating dynamic of the Philippine justice system, and it's certainly something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.